The Duke of Lansmere had not been in love since he was 22. He had every intention of dying that way. Lansmere Hall had been dark for 3 years. He had not allowed it lit. He had walked into Lady Carmichael's ball at 10. By 11, he had drunk 3 glasses of champagne and shaken the hands of 7 mothers. By 1:30, he had been told twice that his late father would be proud. He had not answered either time. He crossed the ballroom with a polite blankness. He had spent 2 years refusing to be drawn into a conversation he could not finish, and he let the gaming room close behind him now like a door against weather. The room was port and beeswax and bad decisions. A fire in the hearth, 3 tables in use, the murmur of men who had stopped pretending to enjoy the dancing. The footmen knew him. They did not need to be told where to set the glass. A drunk laugh rose from the far table. Henry, Viscount Aldridge, 3 sheets to the wind and grinning, lifted a hand. "Edmund, come and witness my ruin." Edmund crossed to him. "How much?" "Twice tonight. The Earl of Whitcombe has a hand a man should not be allowed to draw." Edmund looked at the table. The Earl of Whitcombe sat opposite an empty chair, portly and pink and pleased with himself, the cards laid out for a piquet that was about to acquire a different player. The Earl's eyes went up. They lit. "Your Grace." "My lord." He sat. He did not look at Henry again. He did not need to. Henry had already settled back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man about to watch something he had paid for. The Earl proposed £200. Edmund set his glass down. The candle at his elbow flickered. "For £200, my lord. I shall not even shuffle the deck." Henry laughed once into his port. The Earl flushed. For him, £200 was not, in fact, a paltry sum, but he had been told all evening that he was unbeatable, and a player told that long enough will reach for the wrong stake. "My daughter, then, her hand in marriage, against your 200. The room around them did not quiet. The room around them had not been listening. Only Henry heard. Only Henry, and the footman by the door, and a clerk with a tray of glasses who had paused with the tray suspended at exactly the wrong angle. Edmund's hand was on the deck. It paused. Half a beat. No longer. Henry watched the hand. The hand had not paused at a card table in 9 years. Then Edmund picked up the deck and dealt. He let the Earl win the first hand. The second, the third. The Earl grew loud and warm and certain. By the 4th, he had begun to speak of his daughter as though the wager were already a settlement, and to call Edmund "Your Grace" in the easy way of someone who had decided that the form of address would soon mean something domestic. Edmund won the 4th, the 5th, the 6th. The Earl set his cards down very slowly. The deck went back into the center of the table. "I shall call upon her in a week," Edmund said, without looking up from the cards. He stood. He picked up his glass. He drank what was left. "Henry, Edmund." He walked out. Henry stayed where he was, port in hand, watching the doorway long after Edmund had gone through it. The Earl was speaking somewhere behind him, the color high in his face, the explanation already half built in the air. Henry did not turn. He had seen the hand pause on the deck. He had nothing to say about it, not yet. Outside, the corridor was cool and dim. Lansmere did not look back at the gaming room. He nodded once at the footman holding the door. He crossed the marble of the entry hall with the same flat affect he had crossed it with arriving, and he handed his hat to a porter who knew not to ask whether the carriage was wanted, because it was always wanted, and it was always waiting. The drive at Carmichael House had 2 lamps lit at the gate. His own drive at Lansmere had none. He stepped into the carriage. The footman shut the door. The horses started. Behind him in the gaming room, somewhere down a corridor he could no longer hear, the Earl of Whitcombe was explaining to a small ring of curious men that his daughter would be calling on the Duke of Lansmere in a week. Or rather, the Duke of Lansmere would be calling on her. It came to the same thing. It had been a wager. It had been honorably won. The Earl said honorably twice. He was the only one in the room who did. The silver tray weighed exactly what it had weighed every morning for 4 years. Beatrice carried it through the dressing-room door and set it on the low table by the window. Tea, hot chocolate, a folded slice of bread, a small dish of plum preserve. She poured. She laid the dressing-gown over the back of the chair. She drew the curtains the last hand-width Lady Cordelia preferred. Cordelia was at the writing desk in jonquil silk. A letter lay open under her elbow, the paper gone soft from rereading. She did not look up. "Beatrice, has the post come?" "Yes, my lady." That was the morning. That was every morning. Cordelia used her name. Beatrice used the title. There was no eye contact. The tea steamed where it had been set down. The dressing gown waited where it had been laid. Beatrice closed the door behind herself with the small, careful click of a maid who had been closing doors for 4 years and had decided that the door was the only thing in the room she was likely to perfect. She caught her own reflection in the silver pot as she went out. It was the first time she had looked at her own face in days. Amber eyes, honey-colored hair pinned plainly back, gray poplin that did not show stains. A face she had been told her entire life was borrowed. She had agreed. She was, after all, a maid. Maids did not have opinions. They had hands. The plain narrow stairs took her down to the kitchen. It was the kind of house designed to make a stranger feel both welcomed and outranked. She had done her best over 4 years to be outranked gracefully. The bell from the Earl's study went at noon. Cordelia was sent for. Beatrice was sent up with the coffee. She carried the tray into the study, and the Earl waved her at the sideboard without looking. He was at his desk, cravat already pulled loose, snuff scattered in a small dry constellation across the blotter. He had been drinking since breakfast. He had decided the drinking was the reasonable part of his morning, and the color high in his face agreed with him. Cordelia stood in the center of the rug. She had not been told to sit. "You will marry the Duke of Lansmere," the Earl said. A short silence. "I beg your pardon. You will marry the Duke of Lansmere. He will call on you in a week. The matter is arranged." Cordelia's hand went to the back of the chair beside her. She did not sit. She held the wood the way a woman holds a railing on a moving boat. "Father, we had an agreement. I was to choose at the end of the season. The agreement is voided." "By what?" "By £8,000 a year, Cordelia. That is what we do not have. We have instead 2 mortgages. The Duke of Lansmere has £8,000 a year, and a name I would not be ashamed to attach to yours. The matter is arranged. I have given my word. You have given mine." The Earl reached for his glass. He drank what was in it. He set the glass down too hard. "I have given the Duke's. He won it at piquet." Beatrice set the coffee pot down on the sideboard, very gently. The lid did not rattle. Her hands had been steady through worse than this. "Piquet at Lady Carmichael's last night." The silence in the study was a thing one could have lifted. Cordelia turned. She did not look at Beatrice as she passed. She closed the door behind herself with the small, precise click of refusal. Her father would not have the satisfaction of a slammed door. The Earl picked up his snuff box. The snuff went everywhere. Beatrice considered this a useful diversion and let it cover her exit. She carried the cold coffee out into the entry hall. The under-butler was at the side table with the morning's post. He had not noticed her come in. He had a letter in his hand and was reading it half aloud, the way some men reread a thing once to make sure it has said what they thought it said. "Edmund, Vanessa Pemberton is in town again. I thought you would want to know. Yours, Henry." The under-butler frowned at the letter. He folded it. He set it on the salver for the Earl, who must have opened it absently at breakfast and walked off. Beatrice carried the tray past him without slowing. She did not know the name. She did not know the woman. She filed it away. The throat closes before the mind knows why. Her throat closed once, then loosened, and she was on the back stairs with the tray and the lukewarm coffee before she had decided whether to think about the name at all. Upstairs, she could hear Cordelia, not crying. Cordelia did not cry. Cordelia argued aloud with empty rooms and threw small things at upholstered chairs. Beatrice listened for the impact of a slipper against the chaise. It came. She kept walking. She had her own room. It was the size of 2 larger cupboards, put end to end, a narrow iron bed, a washstand, a small chest where her 3 dresses lived. The window was high in the wall and showed only a square of sky. Under the mattress, wrapped in a clean piece of linen, were the bound notebooks. There were 7 of them now. She had filled them at night by tallow candle, the door closed, the writing slanted and small to save the paper. Stories about islands she had never seen and would never see. A keeper in a lighthouse who corresponded with her sailor by signal flag. A girl who walked into a house of mirrors and came out as someone else entirely. She thought of them as the only place she went that was not the Whitcombe townhouse, and she went there most nights. She did not write that evening. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and listened to the house. The Earl had gone out to his club. Cordelia had not eaten. The cook was complaining in the kitchen about the wasted chops. From the top floor came the small sound of Cordelia turning the pages of the American's letter again. The Duke of Lansmere. She had never met him. She had never seen him. The household had spoken of him perhaps 4 times in the years she had been there, the way the household spoke of all the very rich men, with a kind of polite distance that did not require liking. He was wealthy. He was titled. He was unmarried at 31, which was old to still be unmarried, but he was a duke, which excused it. That was the sum of what she knew. She suspected he looked at women the way a man looks at a horse he has not yet decided to buy. She suspected most very rich men did. There was no special harm in him. There was, presumably, no special good either. She wondered briefly what he had been doing at 11:30 on a Tuesday night that had ended with her mistress wagered against £200 at a card table. She did not wonder long. A maid did not wonder long. There were worse things, she supposed, than being told you were not allowed to wonder. There were also better things. She made a short list of both. The list of worse things was longer. The list of better things ended at bread without butter. She blew out the candle. The room went the small, dim gray of a kitchen-warmed garret at evening. From 2 floors above, she could hear Cordelia begin to weep at last, not loudly, not yet. Beatrice lay down on the iron bed in her gray poplin and closed her eyes. She slept. Somewhere, 4 miles away across Mayfair, the Duke of Lansmere was being told by his man that a letter had come from Lord Aldridge. He did not open it. The candles in the long gallery at Lansmere Hall had not been lit. They had not been lit, in fact, in 3 years. Beatrice slept. The name in the entry hall had been Vanessa Pemberton. She would not remember it in the morning. She would remember it again, much later, in a fire-lit library, in a room she had not yet entered, from a man whose face she had not yet seen. Beatrice had fallen asleep at the writing desk. She had been copying the last finished chapter of her own notebook onto the cleaner paper, slanting the writing small to save what was left of the candle, and her head had come down onto her forearm at 1:30. She woke because Cordelia was shaking her shoulder. Beatrice, Beatrice, wake up. I need you. I need you to wake up. The candle had guttered to a thumb's height. Cordelia was barefoot. The American's letter was in her hand again. Her face had the bright washed look of a girl who had been weeping into a pillow for 2 hours and had wept her way through to the other side of weeping. Beatrice sat up. My lady, Theodore sails in 3 days. He has asked me. Beatrice, he has asked me to come with him. To Boston. To Boston, Beatrice waited. I am going. Yes, my lady, and I need you to take my place. She had been waiting for this sentence for 2 hours. The body knew the shape of it before the words arrived. Her chest did not tighten. It locked. Her hands in her lap folded. My lady. Permanently, Beatrice. You will marry the Duke of Lansmere. You will live at Lansmere Hall. You will be Lady Cordelia. I have written the cover story already. You ran off with a stable boy. No one will ask about a lady's maid. No one in this house will look for you. They will not even miss you. They will only be sorry about the linen. It was, Beatrice reflected, the only time in 14 years that Cordelia had spoken to her as though she were her closest friend. She suspected the elevation was temporary. You cannot mean it. I do mean it. I have never meant a thing more. My lady, I am a maid. You are my friend. You have always been my friend, Beatrice. I am asking you as a friend to do this one thing for me. You can have everything I had. The gowns, the carriages, the Duke. Have him. He is yours. I do not want him. I want Theodore. "Have you considered, my lady, what the Duke wants? He won me at cards. He cannot have considered it himself." Beatrice looked at her. Cordelia looked back. They had known each other for 14 years. It was the first time Cordelia had looked at her as though she were a person and not a piece of household equipment, and it was because Cordelia wanted something. The wet eyes worked because Cordelia had used them all her life and knew they worked. Beatrice did not move. She did not raise her voice. She said one sentence: "I am going to my mother." Then she stood. She picked up the spent candle. She walked out of the room. Behind her, Cordelia was already weeping again into the bedclothes, and the weeping was real this time, but it was no longer Beatrice's problem. She did not ring for the groom. She saddled the chestnut gelding herself in her own gray poplin, with the bridle she had watched the groom buckle 100 times. The horse was fond of her. He did not stamp. The Muse-boy had gone home at midnight. She led the gelding to the cobbled yard, set her foot in the stirrup, and went up. The London streets were empty. She passed Hyde Park at the trot. The lamplighters were doing their reverse work, putting out the lamps as the eastern sky thinned. She crossed the river at Battersea, and the gelding's breath went white in the lane. By the time the lanes turned into proper country, she had passed 3 carts and a milk wagon and 2 foxes crossing toward a hedgerow. She did not see another rider. The morning came up gray through the hawthorns. Hollowmere was 4 miles past the last toll. Her mother's cottage was at the end of a rutted lane and had stone walls thick enough to keep out a winter. Bridget had lived in it for 22 years. Beatrice had lived in it for the first 6 of her own life before she was placed in service. She tied the gelding at the post. The cottage door opened before she reached it. Bridget was in the doorway in a gray wrapper, her white hair down on her shoulders. Her face, the face Beatrice had assumed was her own face, 20 years older, calm and entirely unsurprised. "Child, mother, come in." The cottage was warm. The fire had been kept all night. There was tea in the pot, as though Bridget had been expecting her. Beatrice sat at the scrubbed pine table and told her, in a flat voice, what Lady Cordelia had asked. She had rehearsed nothing. She did not need to. Bridget listened. She did not gasp. She did not exclaim. She did not, Beatrice would later reflect, even look surprised. She listened to the whole story, with her hands folded in her lap and her gray eyes on her daughter's face. When Beatrice was done, she sat for a long moment with her hands folded and her gray eyes still steady. Then she rose. She went to the chest at the foot of the bed. She lifted the linen out. She took from the bottom of the chest a small velvet box and a folded letter sealed with brown wax. She carried them back to the table. She set them in front of Beatrice, and she closed her daughter's hands over them. "You must take the offer, child. Go to London, marry the Duke. The stomach drops first, the chest goes after." Her hands held the box and the letter as though they belonged to someone else. "Mother, wear this necklace at your throat. It was given to you by your blood. Keep this letter. Do not open it until the right time." "What right time?" "You will know it. Mother, you cannot mean this." "I mean it more than I have meant anything in 22 years. The fire ticked in the grate. Bridget looked at her as though she were looking at her for the last time. Beatrice looked back, as though she were still being looked at by her mother. Only one of them was right. She lifted the lid of the velvet box. Inside, on white silk, lay a small, round ruby pendant ringed with diamonds on a fine chain of gold. The stone caught the firelight. It was the kind of stone a maid did not see twice in a lifetime. "This is not mine. It is more yours than anything you have ever owned. Wear it. Do not show it to your mistress." "Mother, hush. The horse will get cold. Go." She did not understand. She did not have the time to understand. The body had its own knowing. The chest locked, the spine straightened, the hands closed over the box. She rose. Bridget went with her to the door. She bent and embraced her daughter once. The wrapper smelled of wood smoke and lavender. It would be the last time Beatrice would hold her mother in her arms. Outside, the gelding was waiting. She mounted. She turned in the saddle to look back at the cottage door. Bridget was already going inside, but the wind carried a whisper from the doorway, soft as the morning mist. "God be with you, my lady." Beatrice did not hear the word at the end of the sentence. She had heard "God be with you, child," because that was what she had been called for 22 years. The wind ate the rest. The audience heard. She rode back to London with the velvet box in her riding pocket and the sealed letter against her breastbone under the grey poplin. The sun came up over Battersea. The chestnut gelding did not falter once. She walked into Cordelia's bedchamber at noon and told her, "I will do it." She did not sit. She did not soften the words. Her hands were folded in front of her grey poplin. Cordelia threw herself into her arms. "Beatrice, oh Beatrice, you will save my life." "Yes, my lady." The afternoon was a curriculum. The bronze ball gown was laid out across the bed. It was a color Beatrice would never have chosen, deep and warm, and the wrong sort of striking for a maid, the right sort for a lady. Cordelia drew it on over her shift and showed her how it fastened at the back. Beatrice mimicked her with the careful copying of a girl who had been folding Cordelia's clothes for 4 years and knew which hook went into which eye without looking. The steps of the quadrille came next, then the country dance, then the waltz. Cordelia counted aloud, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and Beatrice's feet found the pattern by the second pass. Eidetic memory was useful in dance as in copy chapters. By the 4th pass through the waltz, she was leading because Cordelia had stopped paying attention. Cordelia stepped back. "You will do." "Thank you, my lady. You will more than do. He will not know." "Will he know that I am 22, and that you are 22, and that my hair is the same color as yours, and my eyes are the same color as yours, and the only difference in our voices is that I have been trained out of mine, my lady? He will not know. He has not met me. He will meet me. He will meet his fiancée." Beatrice did not answer. She looked at herself in the long pier glass. The woman in the mirror looked back. Neither of them knew the other. It was, on the whole, useful preparation for marrying a stranger. "What is the cover story, my lady?" "You ran off with a stable boy last night. I have already told the housekeeper. The housekeeper will tell the cook. The cook will tell my father. My father will not look for you. My father has never looked for a servant in his life. And you, my lady, what will be said of you?" "That I have gone to Lansmere Hall to meet my husband, which I have. The husband, of course, will not be the one my father supposes." She laughed at her own cleverness. Beatrice did not laugh. She asked Charlotte's help in changing. Then she took the gelding's saddle off, fed him oats from her own hand, wiped him down. Then she climbed the back stairs to her garret. She lit the tallow candle. She drew the bound notebook out from under the mattress. She opened it to the half-finished fantasy chapter she had been transcribing 2 nights before, the one about the keeper in the lighthouse, and she wrote one line under it in her small, slanted hand. "Beatrice Hilbrough went to sea and was not heard from again. Bring back her bones if you can find them." She did not laugh at her own joke. The throat had gone too tight for laughing. She closed the notebook. She did not open it again for 3 years. The ruby box and the sealed letter she wrapped in a clean piece of linen and tied with twine, and she laid the small parcel at the bottom of the carpet bag Cordelia had given her for her things. She put on the bronze ball gown over a clean shift. She let Charlotte, the new maid Cordelia had hired for Lady Cordelia at Lansmere, pin her hair up the way she had watched it pinned 1,000 times. She looked into the mirror once more. The woman there was not Beatrice Hilborough. The woman there was Lady Cordelia Whitcombe, and the Duke of Lansmere would meet her at the door of the country house at 4 the following afternoon. He would believe her. He had no reason not to. Behind the bronze silk, against her breastbone, the ruby pendant on its fine gold chain pressed cool and small and heavy. She had not put it on at the throat. Not yet. Bridget had said, "Do not show it to your mistress." She had not. The sealed letter, in the carpet bag, rode at the bottom of her things. She blew out the tallow candle. The garret went the small dim grey it always went. Lady Cordelia Whitcombe walked out of it. Beatrice Hilbrough closed the door behind her. The plan was to be discovered barefoot. Beatrice had walked the corridor since 6 o'clock in her morning dress, with her hair half pinned, rehearsing the panic of a lady whose maid had vanished overnight. Charlotte had drawn the trail of the story across the household by breakfast. Beatrice ran off with a stable boy. My lady is distraught. She cannot even find a slipper. And Cordelia, somewhere on a ship in the Pool of London beside Theodore, did not need to be consulted. She rounded the corner of the entry hall at the trot. She did not see him. She collided with a wall of black wool that was not a wall. She fell. He caught her, but the fall had already happened. Her ankle gave way under her, hard, the small bone twisting against the parquet. She heard it before she felt it. A small, flat crack. Then the burn. She looked up. He looked back. He was tall and broad and dark in a high-collared traveling coat, and his eyes were the color of wet slate, and there was silver at his temples, though he could not be much over 30. She had seen the portrait of him as a boy of 7, hanging in the gallery of a house she would not visit for a week. She had not, she realized, been prepared. "Forgive me." He did not let go of her elbow. "You are hurt." "My ankle." "Sit." "I have no chair." He picked her up. He did not ask. He carried her 3 steps to the drawing-room doorway and 4 more to the chaise by the window, and he set her down, and he knelt on one knee at her feet with the careful weight of long experience around horses. He had learned, somewhere, how to put a hurt animal on the ground without making it worse. "Allow me." He took her foot in both hands. Through the stocking, he pressed once at the line of the ankle bone with the careful pad of his thumb. He pressed twice. "Sprained, not broken. You will need to keep off it 2 days. The chest does not loosen at a kindness. The chest locks." Hers locked. She did not breathe for a half beat. His face was lowered to her ankle, and she could see the silver at his temple, very close, and the careful set of his mouth, and the way the wet slate eyes did not flick once to her bare ankle, even though they were a hand's breadth from it. He looked up. His eyes flicked to her face. Once. He did not say anything. She did not breathe. He set her foot down. He stood. He turned to the bell-pull. "I shall send for tea." He paused. He turned back. The careful set of his mouth had loosened by a fraction. "Forgive me. I do not know if you take tea." She did not laugh. She did not think she had the breath for laughing. "I take tea." "Good. I do also." A footman came. He gave the order with the same flat competence he had used for the diagnosis. He did not sit. He stood by the mantel with his back to the fire and his hands clasped behind him, and looked at her foot and did not look at her face. The order of things in the room was ankle, fire, the unfinished question of who she was supposed to be. She remembered. "Your Grace, I do beg your pardon. I have made an extraordinary entrance." "You have. I shall not require you to repeat it. My maid has run off." "So I gather." "With a stable boy." "A man's reach is, on occasion, beyond his merit." She heard the dry note in his voice, and almost smiled. She caught herself in time. He had come, he said, to be received by her father. He had ridden ahead of his own carriage and had not been expected for another half hour. He would, with her permission, withdraw to the morning room and wait. He was very sorry about her ankle. He thought, on the whole, that she ought to keep off it the whole day. But she had fallen so well that he suspected she had fallen before and required no advice from him. It was, she suspected, the longest sentence he had spoken in some weeks. He bowed. He left. She lay back on the chaise and stared at the painted plaster ceiling and put the back of one hand over her eyes. She had not been prepared. The carriage was new and very well sprung. Charlotte sat opposite Beatrice with her hands folded on the warm slipper in her muff. Edmund rode alongside on a black gelding for the first 10 miles. Then the gelding was sent back with a groom, and the Duke of Lansmere, without announcement, without ceremony, opened the carriage door at the next coaching inn and got in. He sat opposite her, beside Charlotte, who pressed herself respectfully into the corner. He did not speak think for 15 miles. She did not either. She watched the hedgerows. He watched the line of light moving across his knee. The carriage rocked. The road climbed. "You are warm enough." It was not a question. "Quite warm, your grace." "Thank you." A pause. "I am told you keep a journal." She thought it through before she answered. Cordelia did keep a journal, small, perfumed, mostly about ribbons. Beatrice had read it once on a dull Sunday and had laughed quietly into her own apron. "A little. May I ask what you write?" He had practiced the question, the careful throat clear before it gave him away. She heard the practice, and, for no reason she could account for to herself afterwards, she gave him an honest answer. "Fantasy, faraway islands, things that do not exist." The silence that followed was not the silence of a stranger. He looked at her. She looked out the window. He did not look away. "I should like to read them. I have never shown them to anyone. You may consider this the first request." The chest had been loose by the 10th mile. It went tight again at the careful weight of the word request. She had not been requested of in 14 years of service very many things. She had been told, and she had been instructed, and she had been ignored. She had not been requested. She did not look at him. She did not trust herself to. "I shall consider it, your grace. That will do." She had not yet decided whether his careful courtesy was the result of breeding or of long practice avoiding people. She suspected both. She did not realize, until much later, that she had answered as herself and not as Cordelia, and that neither of them had noticed. The carriage slowed at the foot of a long hill. He helped her out at the inn for 10 minutes of stretching the leg. His hand stayed under her elbow until she was firm on the gravel, and then it withdrew with the precise small care of a man returning a borrowed thing. They climbed back in. She closed her eyes against the corner of the window. She had not slept in 3 nights. She was asleep before the carriage turned in at the Lansmere Drive. He did not wake her. The Lansmere Drive was long. It was lined with elms, grown to the height that takes 100 years to make, and the lamps at the gate were not lit. She noticed both. Edmund handed her down from the carriage with the same hand at her elbow as before. Charlotte carried the warm slipper in the muff. Hodges was at the door, 58, narrow, white-gloved, the careful precision of 30 years as a butler in his bearing. He had taken note of his master's silences for the last 3 of those years. "Your Grace, my lady, welcome." He looked at her for 1 beat longer than the welcome required. Then he turned to take her cloak. Beatrice did not know what the beat meant. She filed it. Augusta was in the drawing-room with the fire built up and the lamps lit and a small tea tray that was new and had been brought in the moment she heard the carriage. She did not rise. She lifted both hands. "Come here, child. Let me look at you." Beatrice limped across the rug. Augusta took both her hands. She held them. She looked at her. Long, frank, complete, the way a horsewoman looks at a new horse she is about to like. Beatrice held the look. She had not held a look like it in some time. "You are not what I expected. Thank goodness." Edmund said nothing. "Edmund, the candles in the long gallery. Light them." He did not move. The jaw went very still. "Edmund, mother." "You are 31 years old. You are a duke. You may decide to be afraid of candlelight only if you also decide to be afraid of dinner. Sit down, drink tea. Charlotte may take Lady Cordelia upstairs to dress." It was the most efficient minute Beatrice had spent in a long time. Tea came. Beatrice sat. Edmund stood at the mantel and did not drink his. Augusta poured for 3 and prattled about the engagement party menu and the names of the house guests with the practiced ease of 40 years as mistress of this house. A steady stream of trivia, she clearly believed, was the kindest thing one could do for any newcomer in the first hour. Beatrice, Lady Cordelia, answered politely, yes. No, she had no preference. She would defer to her grace. Augusta said, easy, mid-sentence, almost in passing, "I have invited Lady Lytton to the party. Vanessa Pemberton as she was. She has been widowed less than a year, and I thought it would do her good to be among friends." Edmund's teacup paused at his lip, half a beat. No longer. Beatrice watched the cup. Edmund did not. Augusta watched Beatrice watch the cup. The three of them did not look at one another. The fire ticked. He set the cup down without drinking. "As you say, mother." "Yes, as I say." Augusta turned and looked at Beatrice, and her eyes had softened in a way that the words did not. The name Vanessa Pemberton sat in the room for a moment longer than the other names. Beatrice did not know why. The throat closed once. The body kept its own counsel. Charlotte stood at the doorway with the warm slipper. "My lady, your bath will be ready." Beatrice rose. She curtsied, small, careful, slightly too low for a duchess to be. Edmund noticed. The wet slate eyes flicked once to the floor and back. He said nothing. Augusta said, mildly, after she was gone, "I find I like her. Edmund, do try not to ruin it." She had been at Lansmere Hall 4 days when she realized the long gallery was never lit. The other rooms breathed. The morning room with its yellow chintz, the library with its low fire, the dowager's drawing room where Augusta took her tea at 4 and her sherry at 6. But the gallery, the great east-facing room with the family portraits in their dark gilt frames, held nothing but cold afternoon light from the unshuttered windows and the small gray echo of her own footsteps. She walked the length of it once, slowly, and then she walked back. The portraits looked at her the way unfamiliar people did at the assembly rooms, with the polite and complete attention of strangers who would not remember her tomorrow. At the far end, a small portrait of a boy of perhaps 8, dark hair already too serious for his face. She read the brass plate. Edmund Ashbourne, 8th of his line, aged 7, anno 1795. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the unlit candles in their sconces, and at the cold hearth, and at the long polished floor, and she understood that the room was not unused. It had been left unlit deliberately by the man whose face had once hung here as a child, and who could not, for reasons he had not yet told her, bear to see his own portrait in candlelight. "You are not supposed to be in here." His voice from the doorway. She turned. He was at the gallery door in a dark gray morning coat with the breakfast paper still half folded under his arm. He had been looking for her. He had not been calling her name. "I beg your pardon." He crossed the gallery in a long stride and took her elbow and pulled her, gently, not roughly, into the wood-paneled alcove behind the corner sconce. His hand stayed at her elbow. His face was very close. "It is cold in here. You will catch a chill." "I was looking at the portraits." "Yes, I gathered." He did not let go. His other hand came up. It rested briefly on the panel by her head. He was not pinning her. He was simply not moving. She could smell beeswax on his coat and the faint cold of the gallery air on his skin. He looked at her. She looked at him. He did not move for a beat. He did not move for another. He bent his head a fraction. The wet slate eyes had gone dark. She felt his breath against the side of her face. Then he stopped. It was not she who stopped him. She would have known if it had been she. He stopped on some old promise of his own that she could not yet see the shape of. His hand left the panel. He stepped back. "Forgive me." "Your Grace." "Edmund." Edmund. The first time she had said his name. He turned. He left the alcove. His footsteps went away down the gallery and through the door at the far end and into the sunlit corridor beyond it. She stood in the alcove with her hand on the panel where his hand had been, and she did not move for several minutes. She walked, eventually, out into the garden, where the air was warm and roses smelled of warm gardens. She did not cry. The chest had loosened by inches. She walked along the gravel path twice and stopped at the sundial and looked at her hands. She had begun the morning believing she was steady. She was not steady. She walked back to the house and asked Charlotte to brush her hair until she could breathe normally again. Charlotte did. Charlotte did not ask any questions. Charlotte did not look at her once. She had gone walking that evening to think. The rain had come on her at the lake path, and she had walked back through it because she would not run from a thing that was only weather. By the time she reached the entry hall, her hair had come down and her gown was clinging to her ribs, and her slippers were dark with mud. Hodges took one look at her and sent the housekeeper for towels and a hot stone for her bed. Edmund met her on the stairs. He did not speak in front of the servants. He walked her up. He stood with her at her bedchamber door while the housekeeper went past with the towels and lit the candle inside her room. He waited until the door of the housekeeper's stair had clicked shut at the end of the corridor. Then he stepped close. He took her face in one cold hand at the jaw, not at the cheek, at the jaw, the way a man steadies a horse, and he kissed her, once, hard, on the mouth. His mouth was cold from the corridor air. His hand was steady. He did not deepen the kiss. He pulled back. This will be passion, nothing more. Do not mistake it. The voice was rougher than he had meant it to be. The audience heard the roughness. Beatrice heard the warning under the roughness. She did not answer. She did not have an answer. He stepped back. He bowed slightly, a small, almost mocking bow that was not for her. It was for himself. He had just done a thing he had told himself he would not do. "Good night, my lady. Good night, your grace." He left. She stood in the doorway and listened to his footsteps recede along the corridor and down the great stair, and the spine knew, and the throat knew, and the chest did not loosen at all that night. The next day was warm. He showed her, on a ride to the eastern boundary, the small tree fort he had built behind the thicket at the age of 10. The fort was a plank platform on a low oak with a flat rock for a table and an old brass telescope wedged in the fork of 2 branches. He helped her up the makeshift ladder. The cold chicken came out of his saddlebag. The wine came out of the other. He drank from the bottle. He passed it to her without a glass. She drank from the bottle. He sat on the rock. He did not look at her when he spoke. "I have never brought anyone here." She did not answer at once. She put the wine down on the flat rock. "I shall remember the day forever, your grace." "Edmund! Edmund!" He looked at her. She did not look away. He set the bottle aside and reached, slow, deliberate, and lifted her hand. Only the hand, the back of the wrist, and held it against his cheek for one beat. Then he set it down on the rock between them. He did not kiss her. The almost was the moment. She laughed, small, soft, the kind of laugh that comes when the chest is too full for words. "How alarming! I had thought you possessed of no soft accomplishments at all. I shall have to revise my opinion of you entirely. I shall do it slowly." He smiled. It was, she thought, the first time she had seen him smile. The smile did not stay. He stood. He helped her down the ladder. He handed her up onto the horse. They rode back at the walk through the long, warm afternoon and did not speak. After dinner, he took her to the gallery. Augusta had ordered the 4 nearest sconces lit. Only the 4. The rest of the gallery stood dark. The lit portion held a tall pier glass at the end where the corridor turned, and a low velvet bench by the wall, and the smell of fresh-cut roses Hodges had arranged at the sideboard in the corner. Edmund stood her in front of the pier glass. He did not speak. He drew a small velvet box from his coat pocket and opened it. Inside, on white silk, amber teardrops on a fine gold chain ringed with small diamonds. He stood behind her. She watched him in the long pier glass. He was looking at her throat. He lifted his hands. The back of one knuckle brushed her nape as he found the clasp of the ruby Bridget had given her, the one she had at last put on for tonight, with shaking fingers in the wrong stubbornness of needing to wear something that was hers. He undid it. He lifted it off her neck. He set it on the bench at her elbow. He clasped the amber at her throat. His fingers brushed the side of her neck where the clasp went. He bent. He kissed the side of her neck once. Cool mouth. Warm breath. "It suits your throat better than the ruby. Wear it." The voice had gone formal again. She watched him in the pier glass. The wet slate eyes had gone dark at the gold. He was not looking at the amber. He was looking at her throat. Then his mouth set. Some thought moved behind the eyes. He stepped back. He picked up the ruby from the bench and set it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "You may have both. Wear the amber tonight." "Edmund, forgive me. I have kept you. Hodges will see you up. Good night." He turned. He walked the length of the gallery, past the 4 lit sconces, into the dim, and the dim swallowed him. She stood in front of the pier glass, with the amber at her throat, and the ruby in her palm, and the candles guttering behind her, and she watched the place where he had gone. She walked back to her bedchamber alone. Charlotte was waiting with the warm stone. Charlotte unclasped the amber. Charlotte laid the ruby back in its small velvet box. Charlotte brushed her hair until the chest loosened. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" "No, Charlotte. Good night, my lady." "Good night." She lay in the 4-poster with the curtains drawn and the warm stone at her feet, and listened to the wind in the elms. Somewhere, 2 corridors away, the long gallery had gone dark again. She did not sleep for a long time. When she did, she dreamed of him standing in the alcove with his hand on the panel beside her head, and of the small old promise he had stopped on that she had not yet been allowed to see. In the morning, Vanessa Pemberton would arrive at Lansmere Hall by the first carriage of the day. But that was tomorrow, for tonight the amber was on the dressing table, and the ruby was in its small velvet box, and Beatrice as well as Cordelia, was asleep. She had dressed for him. That was the first injury of the morning. Charlotte had laced her into the lavender silk before breakfast, and pinned 3 small sprigs of lilac into her hair, and Beatrice had stood in front of the long mirror for a half-minute longer than she needed to. She had not let herself say why. She walked the corridor toward the breakfast room at 9:30. The small parlor door was ajar. She heard a low voice, not Edmund. A woman's voice, soft, slow, the consonants carefully placed. "Edmund, do you really?" Beatrice stopped. Through the half-open door, she could see the corner of the small parlor, and the back of a head she did not know. Auburn hair piled in a way that had taken a maid an hour. The woman was standing too close to him. Her hand was on his sleeve. Beatrice could see the hand. She could not see his face. Edmund said something. The voice was too quiet to carry. The auburn-haired woman moved. The other hand came up. She had both of her hands on his sleeves now. She lifted her chin. She said his name once more, and the audience of the morning corridor, Beatrice, only Beatrice, read the angle of her body and the placement of her hands as a thing already understood between them. Beatrice turned. She did not run. She did not weep. She walked back along the corridor with the careful steadiness of carrying something fragile. She passed a footman with a coffee tray. She nodded. He nodded. The lavender hem brushed the polished oak as she went. She reached her bedchamber door. She opened it. She closed it behind her. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She did not move. Charlotte came in at the 1/4 with the morning chocolate. "My lady." "Set it down, Charlotte. You did not come to breakfast. Are you quite well?" "I have a headache. Send my apologies to her grace." "Yes, my lady." "And Charlotte, I think I shall not be coming down for tea either, or for dinner." A small pause. "Yes, my lady, I will tell Hodges." Charlotte set the chocolate on the table by the window and went out without looking at her once. The chocolate sat in its small white cup. It cooled. The skin formed on the top. Beatrice did not drink it. She had looked at the hand on the sleeve. She had not looked at his face. It was, she would realize later, a mistake she would not make twice. The morning passed. The afternoon passed. The hour for tea came and went, and Charlotte came in and took the cold chocolate away without speaking. The hour for dinner came and went, and Charlotte came in and laid out a nightgown without speaking. The hour for the candle came, and Charlotte came in and lit it without speaking. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" "No, Charlotte. Good night, my lady." The lavender silk had been put back into its press. The lilac sprigs were in a small dish on the dressing table. The amber and the ruby were in their separate velvet boxes. The fire had burned down. The room held only the small light of the one tallow candle Charlotte had left. Beatrice sat in the wing chair by the cold fire. She did not weep. She could not weep. The chest had locked at the sight of the hand on the sleeve, and it had stayed locked all day, and locked chests do not weep, they hold. At 11 the house went quiet. At 1:30 she stood up. She put a shawl over the white nightgown. She took the candle. She went down the back stair to the library. The library was warm. The fire had been built up earlier in the evening and had now burned down to the red. One branch of candles was lit on the side table between two armchairs by the hearth. Beatrice did not know who had lit them. She did not ask herself. She set her own small tallow candle on the writing desk by the window. She took up the book she had failed to read that afternoon. She sat in the nearer armchair with the book unopened in her lap. She did not read. She watched the fire. The clock in the hall struck midnight. The library door opened. She did not turn her head. She had known. Edmund crossed the room. He did not speak. He closed the door behind him with a small, careful click that might have been any other door, and he crossed the carpet, and he did not stop at the side table. He sat in the armchair opposite hers. Not beside. Opposite. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took off his gloves. He laid them on the side table between them. He set them flat. He did not look at them. He looked at her. Beatrice. It was the first time he had said her name without a title attached. The throat closed. She did not answer. She did not look away. There was a woman. She held the look. She did not move. Her name was Vanessa Pemberton. The name went into the room and stayed in the room. Beatrice's chest, locked since the corridor, did not unlock. It held differently. It listened. I was 22. I had been at Cambridge for the long vacation. She was at a house party 3 miles from my rooms. I had, for the previous 6 weeks, believed myself to be on the eve of making her an offer of marriage. He paused. The voice was rougher than he had intended. I went to her sister's house. On the morning I had decided to ask, the door of the morning room was a little open. I did not know there was anyone in it. I heard her tell her sister, in the precise voice of a woman doing arithmetic, that she would marry me for the title and the Lansmere coal. The man himself, she said, she would learn to tolerate. A small silence. I walked out of the house without being seen. I was on the dawn train to Dover before her household had sat down to breakfast. I did not come back to England for 2 years. He was looking at the fire now, not at her. He gathered himself. Then he looked up. I have not allowed it since. I had thought I never would again. The eyes held. I had not. Beatrice, I had not prepared for the possibility that I would. She did not move. She could not have moved. The chest had unlocked at the second use of her name, and the throat had opened, and the eyes had stayed steady, and she was not breathing, but the silence was holding her up. He reached slowly across the small distance between the two armchairs. The back of one knuckle touched her wrist, not the inside, the outside, where the small bone showed under the thin skin. He did not press. He left it there for 1 beat. He took his hand back. He waited. She looked at him. He looked back. The fire ticked once in the grate. I am very glad you told me. 6 words. Soft. She did not say more. She did not need to. He nodded. Once. He looked at his gloves for a long moment without picking them up. Then he stood. He did not kiss her. He did not reach for her again. He picked up the gloves. He held them in one hand. Good night, Beatrice. Good night, Edmund. He crossed the carpet. He opened the door. He left. The clock in the hall did not strike again for some time. Beatrice sat in the armchair with the book closed in her lap, and the gloves no longer on the side table, and the candles guttering, and the chest was no longer locked. The fire ticked down to embers. She had been told to disappear by her mistress. She had been told to disappear by her mother. A man she had known for 5 weeks had now told her, without quite using the words, that she might be allowed to stay. She put the book on the side table where the gloves had been. She picked up her tallow candle. She walked back up the stair to her bedchamber. She slept. She did not dream of him in the alcove tonight. She dreamed of nothing. It was the first dreamless sleep she had had in 14 years. The veranda was warm. The roses had been cut that morning and arranged in low silver bowls along the small tea table. Augusta sat at the head with the pot in front of her. The Pemberton women sat to the left. Beatrice sat to the right, in the lavender silk that had been brushed twice and pressed twice and still hung wrong at the shoulders because it had been made for somebody else. She had come down because Edmund would expect her to come down. Augusta poured. Lady Pemberton, milk or lemon? Lemon, your grace. Vanessa, dear, milk, your grace. Thank you. Lady Pemberton lifted her teacup. She turned the small, bright smile she had rehearsed in front of a long mirror. How clever of you, my dear, to arrive at this engagement so unexpectedly. The Earl must have been quite at the end of his hopes. Beatrice's hands closed on her own teacup. The color left her face by inches. The throat tightened. She did not answer. Augusta did. My son, Lady Pemberton, has been at the end of his hopes for the better part of a decade. He has selected his end with great care. Lady Pemberton's smile did not falter. It thinned. Vanessa changed the subject to a play she had seen in Bath. Beatrice drank her tea. She did not taste it. She set the cup down at the precise moment the conversation would let her excuse herself, and she rose with the careful, small motion of someone who had been excusing herself from rooms for 14 years. Forgive me, I find the warmth unkind today. Augusta looked at her once. Long, slow, one blink. Of course, my dear. Beatrice walked the length of the veranda and through the long windows and into the cool stone of the house, and she did not look back. She heard Lady Pemberton begin some small remark about the heat. She heard Augusta cut across it. She did not stop walking until she was upstairs and the door of her bedchamber was closed. She did not weep. She sat on the edge of the bed for an hour with her hands folded. Then it was time to dress for dinner. The dinner was worse. Edmund had been seated between Vanessa and Lady Pemberton, Beatrice between Henry and an older gentleman who spoke entirely about his stables. She did not look at Edmund. She listened to the older gentleman. She drank her wine slowly. She laughed once at one of Henry's lines, and the laugh felt like cloth being torn. Down the table, Vanessa was performing. The voice was pitched precisely for the audience she knew was listening. Do you remember Cambridge in the summer, Edmund? The morning room overlooked the rose garden. She had chosen the precise reference. Edmund's teacup paused at his lip, half a beat. He set the cup down without drinking. Beatrice did not see it directly. She had not looked. She heard the small sound of china touching wood, and she knew. Henry across from her had also heard. His eye flicked once to Edmund and back to her, and his mouth did the small thing it did when he was not amused. Vanessa laughed at something Edmund had not said. Beatrice's throat closed for the second time that evening. The hands stayed in her lap. The color stayed where it was. Lord Aldridge, I had not asked. Is your bay still in season? He is. Lady Cordelia, you are a horsewoman as well? I have read a little. All the best riders begin in books. Henry was kind. She heard the kindness and did not let it undo her. They spoke of the bay for the rest of the course. Down the table, Vanessa leant in to Edmund's ear and whispered something Beatrice did not hear. The teacup paused at his lip a second time. He set it down again. A third time, some minutes later. Lady Pemberton this time. The narration recorded all three. He did not look at Vanessa. He did not look at Beatrice. The third time, he stopped looking up at all. When the women rose to leave the men with the port, Beatrice rose with the rest and did not glance the length of the table. She went to the drawing room. She drank one glass of sherry standing at the mantel beside Augusta. She excused herself the moment the clock struck 10. She walked the long, unlit gallery for an hour before she went to bed. The portraits did not look at her tonight. They looked through her. She did not mind it. She had been looked through before. Charlotte was waiting. Beatrice sat at the dressing table. She looked at her own face in the looking-glass, and the discipline gave way. Her eyes burned first. She did not blink. The burning kept on. Then her voice cracked when she tried to thank Charlotte for the brushing, and the word would not come. It broke on the simplest consonant a tongue can shape, and she stopped trying. The tears came down then. They tracked in 2 slow lines on either side of her nose. She did not lift a hand to wipe them. Charlotte did not speak. Charlotte unpinned her hair. Charlotte took up the brush and began at the ends and worked up. The The tears went on tracking. They did not stop. The chest, which had held the discipline for 8 hours and the days before that besides, took one long shuddering breath, and then another, and then the sobs came, quiet at first, then heaving, the whole body going with them. She put her hands flat on the dressing table to hold herself up. The candles guttered. The fire ticked. Charlotte brushed. Charlotte did not stop. Charlotte did not look at her. Charlotte did not ask. Charlotte brushed her hair through the sobs, and through the slowing of the sobs, and through the long, shaky exhale that came after the sobs, and when the body finally went still, she set the brush down, and went to the basin, and warmed the water at the fire, and brought a folded cloth back, and bathed Beatrice's face. Beatrice did not move. The door opened a small crack. Augusta stood in it in a deep gray dressing gown with a candle in her hand and her white hair down on her shoulders. She had been asleep 2 corridors away and had woken at the small sound of the sobs because the Lansmere house at midnight was that quiet, and she had been a mother for 31 years and was not yet entirely deaf. Charlotte stood. Charlotte curtsied. Charlotte stepped back from the dressing table. Augusta came in. She did not say anything at first. She crossed the carpet. She sat on the edge of the bed. She held out her hand. Beatrice rose from the dressing table. She crossed the small distance. She took Augusta's hand, and she sat down beside her. Augusta said, "I have done this room twice, child. The first time I was 26. The second I was 41. Both times the man eventually came to the door." Beatrice did not answer. Augusta sat with her another minute. She did not stroke her hair. She did not press. She simply held the hand. Then she stood. She kissed Beatrice's forehead once, light and dry. She picked up her candle. "Good night, my dear." "Good night, your grace." Augusta paused at the door. She turned. "Augusta." "In this room, child. In this room I am Augusta." The door closed. Charlotte tucked her into bed. Charlotte sat in the chair by the fire and did not go to her own room. The candle burned down. The fire burned down. Beatrice lay with her face to the wall and breathed slowly, and at some point, near 3 in the morning, the chest let go and she slept. The morning was cold. Edmund was already at the breakfast room. He stood when she came in. He did not move to her chair. He waited until she sat. He sat. "You did not come to dinner the night before last." "I had a headache." "You did not come to dinner last night." "I have a constitution." A pause. "You will come to breakfast tomorrow." "Perhaps." 3 exchanges. 2 cups of coffee left untouched. He looked at her once across the table. She did not look back. He returned to his newspaper. She drank a third of her coffee and excused herself. Up the stairs again. The door closed again. She sat at the writing desk in the lavender gown and took the bound notebook out of the carpet bag, the first time she had opened it in 3 months, and she wrote 1 paragraph. The keeper in the lighthouse had begun to write to her sailor of weather she did not believe in. The sea was not the sea she had been told the sea was. The flags he sent her in answer were not in the order they ought to have been. She suspected him, she wrote, of having a different ship. She closed the notebook. She put it back in the carpet bag. Charlotte brought tea at 4 and stayed for an hour without speaking. By evening, the bath was drawn. Beatrice sat in the tub with her knees up to her chin and her honey-colored hair pinned high and the steam softening the room around her, and she did not think about the ballroom directly. She thought about the staircase. She thought about the descent. She thought about who would be at the foot of it. She thought, after a while, about the necklaces. Charlotte dressed her in ivory and gold silk, long white kid gloves to the elbow, pearl pins in the hair. The hem was longer than the bronze gown of 3 months ago had been, and the bodice cut higher. It was a ball gown for a duchess, not a debutante. The amber and diamond necklace lay across the white silk of the small jewelry roll on the dressing table. Beatrice looked at it for a long moment. She took the small velvet box from the drawer. She opened it. Inside, on the white silk, the ruby ringed with diamonds caught the candlelight. She lifted it out. She clasped it at her own throat with shaking fingers that were nevertheless capable. The gold chain felt cool against the back of her neck. The stone sat where Edmund had once unclasped it. Charlotte did not comment. "Thank you, Charlotte. Light the candle for me, would you?" "Yes, my lady." She did not look up. She left the amber on the dressing table. The walk down the long, curving Lansmere staircase took her perhaps 30 seconds. The ivory silk moved against the carpet. The candles in the great chandelier above the entry hall were lit for the first time in 3 years, and the chandelier itself shook very slightly in the warmth of the assembled candles, and the light fell across her shoulders and the ruby at her throat. She looked at the entry hall. The hall did not look back. She walked to the open doors of the ballroom. The ball was in full warmth, 100 candles in the wall sconces. The orchestra was beginning a country dance, a press of silk and broadcloth and lace, and the warm smell of pomade and roses and beeswax. The Lansmere announcer at the door drew breath to announce her, Lady Cordelia Whitcombe, and his voice carried across the room. Edmund was at the far end. Vanessa was beside him. He turned at the sound of her name. He looked at her. She did not look back. He looked at her throat. He saw the ruby. His glass paused at his lip. Half a beat, no longer. The audience knew that he had seen exactly what she meant him to see. The orchestra rose into the first long phrase of the dance. She walked into the ballroom alone. She had walked into the ballroom alone. She was at the edge of the dance floor with a glass of lemonade she had not drunk when Edmund detached himself from Vanessa at the far end of the room. He crossed the floor at an unhurried walk. He had decided on the first step what he was about to do, and he would not now be turned. The orchestra had paused between dances. The pause held. He stopped in front of her. He took her hand. He lifted it slightly, palm down, and he led her to the center of the room. He raised his other hand for silence. The room, which had not been talking loudly, went quiet anyway. "My friends, I intend to marry Lady Cordelia Whitcombe within the fortnight by special license. She has my full faith. She has my full love. I would have you all know it." He did not look at the room. He looked at her. The applause, when it came, was warm. A small flush rose along her throat. Henry, on the edge of the floor, smiled into his glass. Augusta, across the ballroom in her plum silk, did not smile. She nodded once. Vanessa at the far end did not move. Lady Pemberton's mouth thinned. Beatrice curtsied. Edmund bowed. He led her one step backward and released her hand, the formal release that returns a partner to the floor. The orchestra began the next dance. She did not stay on the floor. The crush was suddenly too much. She excused herself with a small smile that did not lie about anything and made her way along the wall toward the corridor and the small candlelit retiring room at the corner. The dressing table inside had a basin of cool water. She set down her glass. She touched cool water to the inside of her wrists. The door opened behind her. It closed. She knew before she looked who it was. Vanessa crossed the small mirrored room in 3 steps. She did not greet her. She did not smile. The vowels were slow, careful, very precise. "I will have him, engagement or no. I had him first. He has been mine for 9 years. Even at a distance, you will not keep him." Beatrice did not move. She did not turn from the basin. She lifted the cloth. She blotted the water from one wrist. She set the cloth down on the marble. She looked at Vanessa in the glass once. Then she turned. She looked at Vanessa directly. The amber eyes held the dark blue eyes for as long as the dark blue eyes were able to hold them. "He is not a thing to be taken," she said quietly. Vanessa's color drained from the auburn hairline down. The mouth opened. Nothing came. The mouth closed. The auburn head dropped a degree. The dark blue eyes were the ones that looked away. She turned. She left. The door closed behind her. Beatrice stood at the basin and listened to the door click and to the small footstep of a woman walking away too fast on a carpeted corridor. She did not move for a beat. She did not move for another. Then she picked the cloth up and folded it and laid it neatly back on the marble. In the corridor outside, on the other side of the wall, an old lady in violet velvet with a deaf cousin had been adjusting her shawl by the corridor mirror. Lady Jersey did not knock. Lady Jersey did not enter. Lady Jersey simply tucked the line away, the precise 8 words, and the quietly, for the next assembly at Almack's. The next morning's gossip was already written. Beatrice did not yet know it. She returned to the ballroom. She danced one set with Edmund. She drank one glass of champagne with Augusta. She excused herself to bed at 11. The carriage would take her to London in the morning. She had been asleep for 2 hours. The small sound at the foot of the bed was not a sound she could place inside the dream she had been having, and it came twice before she woke. She sat up. The tallow candle on the bedside table caught the figure at the foot of the bed. Cordelia was standing there in a torn traveling dress, her hair undone, her face white. She had the look of someone who had not slept in a week. The hem of her dress was wet. There was mud on the side of her boots. Beatrice! Cordelia! How? The back door. I bribed the night porter at the gate. Beatrice! She stopped. She put her hand to her mouth. She took it down again. He is dead. Theodore, the docks. The night we were to sail, I saw him. I identified him. Beatrice did not move. She did not say, I am sorry. She did not say, come and sit. She did not say any of the things she would have said 2 months ago, when she had still been a maid in this house, and Cordelia had not yet asked her to disappear. She watched her sister's face. She watched Cordelia draw the next breath and shape the next sentence and bring it out. You must give him back. You must give the wedding back. He believes you are me. He will marry me, less than the real me, without knowing. Beatrice, he must never know. You must go. The stomach drops first. The hands fold. The throat does not close. She had used all of its closing in the retiring room. She looked at her sister by circumstance. She saw someone with nothing left to lose, and therefore very dangerous to be near. She did not look at her again. Yes, one word. She did not weep. She rose from the bed. She went to the carpet bag. She put on the gray poplin from the bottom of the press, the one she had brought from her garret 3 months ago and had not worn since. She packed the small valise, the bound notebook, the sealed letter Bridget had given her, 2 changes of linen, a comb, the chestnut velvet box with the amber that had traveled back to London in her trunk. The ruby was at her throat. It had not come off since the ballroom. She did not take off the engagement ring. She would take it off in Hollowmere when the journey was done. Cordelia stood at the foot of the bed and did not help. Beatrice fastened the valise. She put the heavy wool cloak over the gray poplin. She tied the bonnet under her chin. She did not leave a note. He had spoken her into the open in front of the tun. A note would be small. She walked the back stair down to the servants' door. The night porter did not stop her. The London streets were cold and empty and slick with the thin rain. She walked to the inn yard at the next corner and bought a seat on the first stage to Hollowmere. The coach left at 4 in the morning. By dawn, she was past Battersea. By noon, she was at Bridget's empty cottage. The dust had been undisturbed for a fortnight. The neighbor came over within the hour to tell her, gently, that Bridget had died 10 days ago and was buried in the churchyard. The neighbor had wept while telling her. Beatrice had thanked her and had not. She had no money for firewood. By the second evening, she had asked at the village inn whether they needed a serving girl. The innkeeper had set her in the kitchen warming tankards. She had spent 3 days warming tankards. The innkeeper's wife had been kind. She had been given a small room above the stable, and a meal, and a single quiet question about whether she had family nearby, which Beatrice had answered with a shake of the head. The innkeeper's wife had not asked again. She had given her an apron. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the front tap-room door opened. The wind came in with the smell of wet road. A traveler in a dark gray greatcoat had stopped at the door and was speaking with the innkeeper. The innkeeper called toward the kitchen. Polly, take a tankard out. Beatrice took up the tankard. She walked into the tap-room carrying it before her in both hands. She saw Edmund. She did not drop the tankard. He had been ordering ale. He stopped speaking mid-word. He stood very still by the bar. There was dust on his greatcoat, the dust of stopping at every coaching inn for news. His face was tired. His eyes had gone darker than wet slate had ever been. He did not move. She did not move. The innkeeper, who had no idea what was happening, took the tankard from her hand and set it on the bar in front of the traveler, who did not look at the tankard. The room around them carried on. A farmer in the corner with his stew, 2 carters playing dominoes, the inn cat at the hearth. He looked at her. She looked back. He drew a breath. He had not. The audience read in the set of his mouth, prepared exactly what to say. He did not say anything. The front door opened again. The wind came in a second time. A man in a long traveling coat, tall, fair, the tan of a long sea voyage on his face, an American cut to his coat, was in the doorway. He had been riding from the docks. He scanned the taproom, and his face went bright at the sight of her honey-colored hair under the cap. Lady Cordelia, thank God! He crossed the room in 3 strides. He took her by both shoulders. He embraced her in the relief of a husband who had ridden 18 miles on a wrong direction tip, and he held her for 1 beat before he pulled back, and his eyes registered the wrong face. He let go of her shoulders. He stepped back. You are not Cordelia. No. He looked at her hands. He looked at her amber eyes. He looked at her hair. He turned. He looked at Edmund. Forgive me, ma'am. Your Grace. He drew himself up. I am Theodore Marsh. I married Cordelia at Gretna Green a fortnight past, before we made London. I went back to Boston for 2 weeks to settle my affairs and ship our things ahead. I returned to find her at the Whitcombe townhouse, and the household weeping, and the maid telling me she had gone to identify a body at the docks. The body, Your Grace, was not me. I have been searching for her since. I came to Hollowmere on the housekeeper's word that she had spoken of this place. A long silence. Edmund had not moved. His face, the narration caught it through Beatrice's eye, which was the only way it could be caught, had loosened by a degree she had not known a face could loosen. The wager was voided. The engagement to Lady Cordelia Whitcombe had been the wrong engagement to the wrong woman with the wrong name from the start. He looked at Beatrice. Will you come with me? It was not a question. Yes. The same word, same flatness, new meaning. She set the cap aside. She untied the apron and gave it back to the innkeeper's wife with a small word of thanks and a request that the small wages owed her be sent to the parish in care of the rector. She gathered her cloak and her valise. Theodore had hired a closed chaise. He would follow them to London at first light. Edmund's curricle stood at the inn-yard. He handed her up. She sat beside him on the narrow seat with her hands folded in her lap and the ruby at her throat. He did not speak for the first 3 miles. Then, very quietly, he said, Beatrice. Her name in the small, dim warmth of the curricle in the rain. Edmund. He did not say anything else for the rest of the road. He did not need to. The Mayfair townhouse was lit. It had been lit since 7 o'clock because Hodges had sent the message ahead by post-rider that the Duke was riding from Hollowmere with company and that the yellow bedchamber would be wanted. The candles in the entry hall hung warm against the polished oak of the floor. The carriage drew up. Hodges opened the door before Edmund had reached the bell. He took Edmund's greatcoat. He took Beatrice's bonnet. He did neither thing with surprise. He bowed to her in the precise small way of a butler who had been waiting 9 years to bow in this particular direction. He turned his face into the empty entry hall and announced, with the carefully unsurprised tone of 40 years of service, Her Grace, the Duchess of Lansmere. He had said it to no one. The portraits on the entry hall wall had no opinion. The footman by the inner door did not move. Beatrice nearly smiled. Hodges turned back to her. See to the yellow bedchamber, Daniel. The fire should be built up. Her Grace will be cold. She is, after all, a duchess. The footman bowed and vanished up the stair. Hodges looked at Beatrice, and the formal mask did not change, but his eyes were warmer than the entry hall candles. Will you take supper, Your Grace? Or shall I have it sent up? Sent up. Thank you, Hodges. Very good, Your Grace. Edmund did not stop in the entry hall. He took her hand. He led her up the curving stair to the long corridor on the first floor, and along it to the yellow bedchamber, which had been called the yellow bedchamber for 100 years because the wallpaper was a soft pale jonquil and cream stripe, and the bed curtains were yellow silk. The fire had been built up. The bed was turned down. A small tray of bread and cold chicken and warmed wine sat on the table by the window. A jar of beeswax polish stood on the dressing table, freshly opened. He drew her toward the wing chair by the fire. He sat her in it. He knelt beside the chair. He did not speak for a long moment. He lifted his hands. He found the clasp of the ruby pendant at the back of her neck. He undid it. He lifted the ruby off her throat and held it in his palm for one beat. He did not set it aside. He simply turned it once in his palm and brought his hands back to her nape. He fastened the clasp again, his fingers warm against the cool back of her neck, and let the ruby settle once more at her throat where it had been. He stayed kneeling. He looked up at her. "I do not care what your name is, Bee. I knew you before I knew your name." He took her hand. He held it. "Beatrice, Beatrice, Beatrice." She did not move. She looked at him. He looked back. She had not, she realized, ever been looked at in this particular way before, as though the looking itself were a kind of vow. The chest, which had been locked and unlocked and locked and unlocked across 3 months, settled. "Edmund," he nodded. He kissed her hand once at the wrist and laid it down in her lap. He did not press. He did not stand. He stayed by her chair until the fire burned low and the cold chicken on the tray went untouched and the warm wine cooled. He spoke once or twice, small things, not important things. The road from Hollowmere, the color of the lamps at the city gate. Hodges, who he said, dryly, had been preparing the yellow bedchamber for a duchess for the better part of a decade. When the clock in the entry hall struck 2, he stood. He kissed her temple once. He bowed. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Edmund." He went out. The door closed. She slept in the yellow bedchamber with the fire burning down to the red. In the morning, she took the bound notebook from the carpet bag at the foot of the bed. She opened it to the page after the keeper in the lighthouse fragment. She wrote one line in her small, slanted hand. "I have been found." She closed the notebook. She put it on the writing desk by the window, where Hodges, when he came in with the morning chocolate, would see it without remarking on it. The sun was on the windowsill. The roses in the small vase smelled of warm gardens. Beatrice, Beatrice, drank her chocolate. Theodore and Cordelia had reached the Whitcombe townhouse at dawn. By the time Edmund's carriage drew up at 10, the household had been told the truth twice. The Earl was at his desk with 2 empty glasses and a neckcloth that had not been changed. He stood when the door opened. He looked at Beatrice. He saw the ruby. His face went still. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "That necklace belonged to my wife. Take it off, or I shall have the magistrate fetch you before nightfall." Edmund's voice, not raised, not even slightly, came from behind her shoulder. "You will not." The Earl stopped. "You will, instead, listen." Beatrice did not move from her place by the window. She did not take her hand to the ruby at her throat. She lifted the bound notebook from her arm and laid it on the small console table. From its fold, she took the brown wax letter Bridget had given her 3 months earlier. She had opened it in the carriage. She had read it. She crossed the room to the desk. She held the letter out. The Earl took it. He read it. He read it again. The hand holding it did not tremble, but the color left his face by inches. He looked at Cordelia. Cordelia stepped to her sister's side. She put her hand under Beatrice's elbow. "Father, the mark." The Earl looked at Beatrice's face. He did not speak. Beatrice lifted the hem of her gray poplin 1 inch and turned her right foot. The small, heart-shaped mark on the inside of her ankle showed dark against the pale skin. She did not stoop to point at it. She let it be seen. The Earl looked at his own forearm where the shirt sleeve had pulled back from the cuff. The same small mark sat on the inside of his wrist. He looked at her foot. He looked at her arm. He looked at her face for the first time in 22 years. He did not speak. He sat down on the edge of his desk and did not speak. Cordelia said quietly, "She is my sister in every way that matters, and now in blood." The Earl nodded once, not a welcome, a resignation. The thing was done. He did not look at Beatrice again that morning. He did not have the face for it. By the end of the week, the parish register at Hollowmere had been formally amended. The The midwife, Bridget Hilborough, deceased the previous month, was named in the entry as the woman who had taken the elder Whitcombe twin from the nursery on the night of the Countess's death 23 years before. The new entry restored the name of Lady Beatrice Whitcombe, twin to Lady Cordelia, true daughter of Cuthbert and Mary Whitcombe. The Hollowmere rector signed it. The Lansmere rector signed it. The Whitcombe Gazette, the family's small private paper, printed it the following Wednesday. The Earl of Whitcombe was barred from White's gaming room within 10 days. The story of a daughter, wagered at cards, traveled along Pall Mall faster than the carriages. His name was read out, quietly, the way these things are done, at the next dinner of his club at Lord's. He did not attend the dinner after that. Vanessa Pemberton, Lady Lytton, attended the next assembly at Almack's in a new dress of pale jonquil silk. Lady Jersey received her at the door, took her by both hands, looked at her with the slow, precise unsmile that 10 women in London were paid to fear, and turned away to greet the next arrival. Vanessa did not enter the upper room. She stood in the antechamber for 10 minutes. She left. Her widow's settlement was frozen the following week, pending inquiry into the late Lord Lytton's debts at Brooks's. There would not be a second marriage. Lady Pemberton withdrew from town within the month. Her remaining unmarried daughter's card invitations stopped by Easter. Her name was not on the list of patronesses for the autumn assemblies. The 2 daughters returned to the country, where they would eventually marry men of small property and unfailingly even tempers. The audience received each consequence in sequence, and was satisfied. Edmund's carriage drew into the Lansmere drive at dusk. Augusta met them in the entry hall. She did not say much. She took both of Beatrice's hands in hers, as she had on the first day, and looked at her for one long quiet moment, and she said, soft, only the 2 words, "My dear." It was the welcome the whole long story had been working toward. Beatrice nodded once. The throat closed and unclosed. Hodges had, without being asked, but at Augusta's quiet word that morning, lit the first 2 sconces in the long gallery. Only the first 2. The rest of the gallery stood dark. The boy of 7 in his small dark gilt frame at the far end could not be seen from the lit corner. Beatrice noticed. She did not ask Edmund to light the rest. It was, she thought, exactly the right amount of candlelight for tonight. She went up to the yellow bedchamber and bathed and dressed in her nightgown and shawl, and at midnight, when the house was quiet, she went down the back stair to the library with the brown wax letter in her hand. The fire was low. She sat in the nearer armchair, the same one she had sat in 3 months before, and read the letter through for the second time that day. Bridget had been the midwife at the Whitcombe twin birth 23 years before. The Countess had died of the hemorrhage 3 hours after. In the chaos of that dying bed nursery, Bridget, childless, widowed, alone, had taken the smaller of the twins home with her to Hollowmere. The Earl had been told the elder twin had died. He had not asked to see the body. The lost twin had become a small absence the house did not mention. Bridget had raised the child as her own. She had named her Beatrice for her own younger sister, who had died of fever at 6. The name had always been real. The love had always been real. She had wronged the child by taking her. She had not wronged her by keeping her. The letter ended unsigned with one small line in Bridget's slanted hand. "I have loved you well. Forgive me when you can." Beatrice folded the letter. She did not weep. She looked at the fire for a long time. The library door opened. Edmund came in. He did not speak. He sat in the armchair opposite hers, the same chair he had sat in for the wound confession 3 months before. The fire ticked between them. He did not ask to read the letter. He did not ask what it said. He sat with her. The candles on the side table guttered and steadied. The fire fell another inch in the grate. Somewhere, 2 corridors away, the long gallery held its 2 lit sconces and its long, dark rest, and the boy of 7 in his small, dark frame was visible to no one, and the absence of him was not a wound now, but a fact carried. They sat together. The fire burned low. She held the letter in her lap. He did not ask her to share it. It was, she realized, the first time in her life that someone had sat with her without asking her for anything. She let him. Spring came slowly to Lansmere that year. The bound notebook was open on Beatrice's knee. She had been at the library window since 5:30, and the page had filled by inches. Her small, slanted hand, the same hand that had once written stories about a keeper in a lighthouse by tallow candle in a garret above a kitchen. Her first novel had come out the previous autumn in 3 volumes, anonymously by a small Cheapside house. It had sold modestly and well. The first line of it had been the line she had written in the yellow bedchamber at the Mayfair townhouse the morning after the kneel. Edmund had read it before anyone else. He had not asked her to put his name to the dedication. He had asked only that she keep writing. She was on the second novel now. The cocoa on the side table had gone cool. The candle had burned down by an inch. Somewhere above her in the long gallery, the first sconce had not yet been lit for the morning. Hodges did not light the gallery until the family was awake. The candle in her own room had been lit because the spring night still came in cold off the elms. Footsteps in the corridor. Charlotte at the door. "My lady, His Grace asks whether you will come up to dress. The chapel is at noon." "Yes, Charlotte, I'm coming." She closed the notebook. She did not put it away. She left it on the desk, page side down, the way she had done every morning for the better part of 2 years. The candle she blew out herself. The chapel was small. It had stood at the eastern edge of the estate since the 3rd Duke had built it for his Duchess 200 years before. 3 lancet windows above the altar let the spring sun in at long slanting bars across the flagstones at noon. The family was assembled. Augusta, 64 now, still upright, in dark gray silk, held the air at the font. He was 3 months old. He had Beatrice's amber eyes, and Edmund's dark hair, and the small frowning brow of any baby who had been moved from a warm room into a cooler one and had not yet decided to forgive it. Cordelia and Theodore stood by the rail, lately come from Boston for the christening. Henry stood at the priest's left in a new dark coat as godfather. His quiet young wife of 9 months was at his side in pale blue. The Earl of Whitcombe stood at the back of the chapel in black, silent, distant, present, which was the most he had earned and the least the Lansmere household could give. He did not look at Beatrice during the service. He looked at the boy. The priest spoke the small, careful Latin of the christening over the font. He turned to Augusta. He took the boy from her and held him over the water. He named him Edmund Aldridge Ashbourne, 9th of his line. "I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost." The water was cold. The boy registered this. He did not weep. He gathered his small frowning brow into one slow disapproving frown that the audience would recognize much later as his grandmother's. Augusta received him back. She held him up to look at him in the bar of sunlight from the center lancet. She turned her face to the family. The line came, dry as old port, in the precise pitch she had been delivering lines in for 40 years. "He has his mother's eyes, thank God." A small ripple of laughter from the rail. Henry grinned into his cravat. Edmund's mouth did the small thing it had begun to do 3 years on that was as close to a smile as he had ever come in public. Cordelia laughed once, briefly, the bright laugh of a girl. Theodore looked at his wife and looked grateful. The Earl at the back did not laugh, but he did not look away. Beatrice, Edmund's hand at her back, her own hand at her son's small bare foot, did not weep. She smiled briefly. She inclined her head to Augusta. Augusta inclined her head back. They walked out into the spring afternoon. They walked the long gallery together. Some sconces were lit, some were not. Hodges had lit 4 more than usual for the day of the christening, but he had not lit them all, and he would not. The unlit candles at the far east end of the gallery sat clean and white in their sconces and waited for a night that would not, perhaps, ever quite come. The small portrait of the boy of 7 still hung at the far end in his small, dark gilt frame. Beatrice glanced at him as they passed at the threshold. The boy of 7 looked through the dim air the way unfamiliar people did at the assembly rooms, with the polite and complete attention of a stranger who would not remember her tomorrow. He had been Edmund. He had been a child in a house that was about to lose his father in 2 years, and his happiness in 7 more, and the dim air had been kind to him for a long time, and Beatrice did not mind the dim air now. She thought, in passing, of Augusta walking this same gallery as a young woman twice, at 26 and at 41, when her own man had taken his time coming to the door. The third walk had been Beatrice's. The candles had been lit by inches. It was, on the whole, the right shape of a healing. The air slept on Augusta's shoulder. The lilies from the font had been gathered and set in a low white bowl by the library door. Edmund stopped at the library door. He turned to her. "Shall we go home?" It was not a question. He had been correct for the first time in a great while, and the audience understood that he would now continue. Beatrice looked at him. Yes, she gave the air back into Augusta's arms. Augusta was unwilling to surrender him to the nursery just yet, and Beatrice was not going to argue with her grace today. She went into the library. The candle she had blown out that morning had been replaced by Hodges with a fresh one. Her bound notebook lay on the desk where she had left it. She did not open it that evening. She sat in the wing chair by the fire and watched the bar of sun on the polished floor go slow and gold and longer as the afternoon turned. Edmund came and stood at the long window with his hands clasped behind his back and looked at the gardens. The candle in the library window would burn that night and every night after, until first light. The long gallery would never be fully lit. Some rooms remain dim, some of them always will, because that is the shape of a healed thing, the wound carried as a fact, not as a wound. Birth may give a name, but love gives a home forever.